The stray comet screamed. The ship's frame shuddered under the strain as Maxwell pushed the vertical thrusters past every safety limit, the metal groaning in a symphony of imminent failure. The transit through the portal had been a violation, a feeling of being unraveled into a trillion threads of data and then violently rewoven on the other side. He had emerged into a suffocating, subterranean darkness, and now he was flying blind up a geological chimney, a rough-hewn tunnel of rock that clawed at his ship's hull. Alarms blared, a pointless chorus of manufactured panic. Far below, the portal shimmered, an unstable gateway back to the solar system, back to the Korman-Vex Corporation and the death warrant they had signed in his name. He never wanted to see it again. With a final, concussive boom that sent spider webs of cracks through the very bedrock, the stray comet punched through the planet's crust. It burst from the side of a great plateau, scattering a torrent of soil and rock as it emerged into the baleful glare of a jaundiced, yellow sun. Maxwell shielded his eyes, the sudden, unfiltered light a physical blow after the deep black of the cavern. He leveled the ship, its protesting engines whining down to a low thrum. His first proper view of his new home was breathtaking and deeply unnerving. He had arrived in a world that had bypassed familiar evolutionary parts. Below the plateau, a sprawling, swampy jungle unfolded to the horizon, a landscape painted in shades of sickly green, deep violet, and eerie luminescence. There were no trees, not as he knew them. Instead, the jungle was composed of colossal fungi, a forest of alien design. Some, which he mentally dubbed spire caps, grew in impossibly tall, thin stalks that supported glowing, pointed caps. Others were veil shrooms, with wide, flat tops from which hung translucent, curtain-like gills that swayed in the humid breeze. The ground was a carpet of phosphorescent moss that seemed to writhe in the ship's downdraft, and carnivorous pitcher plants, large enough to swallow a person whole, gaped with a silent, vegetable hunger. Their mouths were lined with what looked like iridescent, backward-facing teeth, promising a one-way journey into their digestive depths. He steered the stray comet on a low pause, his knuckles white on the controls. The air was so thick with moisture it felt like breathing through a wet cloth, carrying a scent of rich, damp earth, crushed mint, and something vaguely metallic. Long, serpentine vines, studded with thorns like jagged glass, snaked between the fungal trunks. He watched a patch of what looked like long grass, which he later called coil grass, snapped shut like a bear trap as a small, winged reptile flew too close. As he watched, a six-legged creature, a nightmarish fusion of insect and reptile, scuttled from the shadows of a giant mushroom. Its chitinous plates, the color of oxidized copper, gleamed in the yellow light, and it moved with a liquid, unsettling speed. It paused, its head tilting as a dozen multifaceted eyes tracked the ship's movement, letting out a sharp, chittering hiss before it vanished back into the oppressive gloom. Maxwell swallowed hard, the dry click in his throat loud in the sudden silence of the cockpit. He was the first human to ever set foot on this world. He was finally, terrifyingly, alone. His solitude, a frantic and paranoid state of existence, lasted 3 days. he landed the stray comet in a relatively clear, defensible basin on the plateau, the ship's gray hull an obscene piece of geometry in this world of chaotic, organic curves. He spent his time making short, terrified excursions, first in a sealed EVA suit, then, after the atmospheric analyzer gave a green light, just with a rebreather. The nights were the worst. The jungle came alive with a cacophony of clicks, whistles, and deep guttural calls that his translator couldn't begin to pause. One sound in particular haunted him, a deep, resonant booming that seemed to come from the ground itself, as if some colossal heart was beating in the planet's core. He slept in the cockpit, his pulse pistol on his lap, dreaming of metal spiders and corporate assassins. On the fourth day, driven by the dwindling of his ration packs, he was cautiously examining a patch of bulbous, purple tubers, his scanner working to identify any potential toxins. He had found signs before. Branches of the fungal tree snapped in a way that seemed deliberate, a smooth, polished stone that might have been a tool. He sensed he was being watched. He spun around, pistol raised, his heart hammering against his ribs. They emerged not from the undergrowth, but from the high branches of the fungal canopy, descending with a silent, fluid grace. They were small, ape-like beings covered in fine, gray fur that was patterned with darker swirls. Their faces were dominated by large, intelligent, and dark eyes that regarded him not with malice, but with a profound and unnerving curiosity. They had a liquid depth to them, reflecting the glowing world around them. They carried simple spears tipped with sharpened bone, but held them in a non-threatening manner, pointed towards the ground. Their long, prehensile tails twitched, betraying their alertness as they used them for balance on the thick roots. Maxwell's finger trembled on the trigger. He was out of options, exhausted and on the edge of breaking. He saw their own fear in the way they held themselves, a mirror of his own tension. He slowly, deliberately, lowered the pistol and holstered it. One of the creatures, a female with a distinctive streak of white fur running from her brow and over her left eye, took a hesitant step forward. She made a series of soft, hooting clicks and held out a piece of bright orange fruit, its skin glistening with juice and marked with a delicate, spiraling pattern. He looked from her wide, guileless eyes to the fruit and back again. This was a test. A risk. His suit scanner was 100 feet away in the ship. This could be poison, a trap. But looking at her, at the vulnerability in her posture, he saw no deceit. With a deep breath that did little to calm him, he stepped forward and accepted the offering. The tension broke like a physical thing. The beings, whom he would come to know as the Nile, chittered softly amongst themselves, and in their quiet, welcoming presence, Maxwell felt the first glimmer of something he hadn't experienced since he digitally ghosted the Korman-Vex casino's entire quarterly profit: hope. That hope was incinerated a week later. The period of peace had been a disorienting bomb on Maxwell's soul. He had been led by the Nile, specifically by the female with the white-streaked fur whom he came to know as Kiya, to their village. It was a marvel of organic engineering, a series of woven, pot-like structures suspended high in the canopy of the colossal's veilshroom fungi. Flexible bridges made of living vines connected the dwellings, and the entire community moved with a quiet, communal rhythm. He learned that the Nell had a deep, symbiotic relationship with their world. They would hum or sing to certain plants to encourage them to fruit, and they used the sticky, non-toxic sap from the Tespia caps was a building adhesive. Kiwaye showed him groves where the moss grew so thick and bright it was like walking on carpets of cool green light. She pointed out the patterns on butterfly-like creatures whose wings mimicked the glowing caps of the fungi, a perfect and beautiful camouflage. For the first time in years, Maxwell felt something other than the cold calculus of a hacker or the frantic paranoia of a fugitive. He felt a sense of belonging. This newfound peace was shattered by a sound that did not belong. It was a high-pitched, violent shriek of stressed atmosphere, a sound of pure, brutal physics that cut through the jungle's natural chorus. All the Nile froze, their large eyes turning to the yellow sky. A dark shape tore through the upper atmosphere, a brutalist wedge of gunmetal gray and weapon emplacements that was an obscenity against the organic world. It was a Korman-Vex Reaper-class pursuit vessel. It didn't land so much as it asserted its dominance, its powerful engines burning a massive, smoking scar into the jungle floor, felling a swathe of the ancient fungal forest. Its landing struts crushed the delicate ecosystem under tons of merciless alloy. A heavy ramp slammed down with a deafening clang, and from its dark interior, the things Maxwell had been dreaming of deployed. Arachnoid Sentinels. In their bipedal form, they were sleek, chrome humanoids, unnaturally tall and slender, their movements too smooth, too perfect. As their tactical programming engaged, a cascade of clicks and was echoed through the clearing. Their torsos split, extra limbs unfolded, and their forms reconfigured into terrifying, eight-legged spiders of metal and wiring. Their multiple red optical sensors glowed with cold, analytical malice as they scanned the alien terrain. They weren't here to capture him. They were here to erase him, and their operational parameters clearly did not include preserving the local environment. Their hunt was not a subtle affair, it was an extermination. They moved in a coordinated sweep, a trio of mechanical predators. Their plasma rifles fired incandescent bolts of energy that vaporized anything in their path. The beautiful, glowing fungi exploded in showers of steaming spores and scorched flesh. The phosphorescent mouse beds were burned down to blackened, sterile soil. They were anathema to this world, a plague of cold logic and hard steel unleashed upon a realm of instinct and interconnected life. Maxwell, watching with Kiwaye from the concealment of a high ridge, felt a cold, heavy guilt settle in his stomach. This was his fault. But the planet, in its own savage way, fought back. Maxwell witnessed it firsthand. One of the sentinels, methodically burning a path through a marshy clearing, paused to scan a cluster of what looked like dormant, armored tubers. Without warning, the ground erupted. A pack of the six-legged predators he had seen on his first day, that the scuttlers, as he'd named them, burst from their burrows. They were a frenzy of copper-colored chitin and razor-sharp claws. The sentinel reacted instantly, its plasma rifle swiveling and firing a bolt that blew one of the creatures apart in a spray of ichor. but the others were on it. They swarmed the machine, their weight and ferocity overwhelming its calculated movements. One scuttler latched onto the Sentinel's primary weapon, its powerful mandibles crushing the barrel. Another used its sharp forelimbs to pry at the joints of the Sentinel's legs. The machine let out a screech of distorted static as claws tore at servos and ripped out bundles of fiber optic wiring. It fell, twitching, and the pack descended upon it, tearing the machine apart with a primal fury. For every hunter that fell, however, the others learned. Maxwell watched as the remaining 2 Sentinels adjusted their tactics. They began moving in tighter formation, one covering the other, their sensors scanning not just for Maxwell's heat signature but for the aggressive energy readings of the native foreigner. Their path of destruction became more precise, more efficient. They were no longer just a blunt instrument, they were adapting, becoming a scalpel of annihilation. They pushed forward, a tide of death flowing directly towards the Nile's treetop village. The smoke from their advance carried the stench of burned fungus and sterilized earth, a smell of utter wrongness. Maxwell saw the smoldering ruins of a small grove Kiwaye had taken him to just the day before, a place filled with delicate, bell-shaped fungi that chimed softly in the wind. Now it was just a crater of black glass. A cold, heavy guilt settled in Maxwell's stomach, a feeling so potent it almost made him sick. He was a contagion, and he had brought this metallic fever to a world of profound innocence. His selfish flight had become their apocalypse. He looked at Kiwaye, who was trembling beside him, her large eyes filled not just with fear, but with a deep, aching sorrow for her wounded world. In that moment, something inside him shifted. This was no longer about his survival. It was about theirs. It was about atonement. He would not let it stand. The image of the incinerated grove was seared into his mind, a brand of guilt that eclipsed his own fear. He turned to Kiwaye, who was watching the methodical advance of the 2 remaining Sentinels, her hands clenched into tight fists. He touched her arm, and when she looked at him, her dark eyes reflecting the distant fires, he didn't need a universal translator. She saw the new resolve in his face. He found the rest of the Nile huddled in their high-perched homes, the entire village paralyzed by a silent, communal terror. Through a frantic combination of gestures, pointing at the Sentinels, then at himself, and finally making the shape of his ship arriving through a hole in the ground, he made them understand. He was the reason the metal monsters were here. His guilt was a fire in his gut, forging a new and unfamiliar resolve. He was done running. His first act as a defender was to observe. He and a small party of the Nile's bravest hunters, Kiwaye among them, shadowed the Sentinels from the safety of the high canopy. He watched how they moved, how they targeted, how they reacted. Their logic was their strength, but he knew it was also their greatest weakness. They anticipated direct threats, projectiles, and energy signatures. They did not anticipate the world itself turning against them. Maxwell's mind, accustomed to navigating the labyrinthine logic of firewalls and digital traps, began to see the entire ecosystem as a distributed, organic security system waiting for a command prompt. He learned from the Nile which plants reacted to sound, which vines were the strongest, which spores caused hallucinations. He discovered that the deep booming he'd heard at night was the sound of colossal puffball fungi releasing clouds of microscopic, irritating spores to deter nocturnal grazers. He found that the coilgrass didn't just snap shut on small creatures, it reacted to the subtle vibrations of heavy footfalls. He saw how the Nile used the sticky, amber-like sap from the spirecaps not just for building, but as an incredibly effective snare for catching prey. He became a strategist, a general in a war fought with thorns and sap, his datapad now used not to crack code, but to map out ambush points and calculate the trajectory of thrown objects. For days, the jungle became a workshop. Maxwell taught the Nile the concept of a delayed trap. They found a narrow canyon that the Sentinels would have to pass through. High above, Maxwell and the Nile spent hours carefully severing the thick stalks of several giant puffballs, leaving them clinging by a thread. A single, well-aimed rock would send them tumbling down. He also discovered a type of crystalline rock buried near geothermal vents that didn't just release an EMP, it shattered with explosive force when subjected to a sudden, intense energy spike like a plasma bolt. He showed the Nile how to strategically place these shatterstones along the canyon path. The first ambush was a partial success. As the Sentinels entered the canyon, the Nile sent the puffballs crashing down. The canyon filled with a suffocating, round cloud of spores. The Sentinels' optical sensors went haywire, their metallic bodies coated in the fine, irritating dust. One of them, disoriented, fired a wild plasma bolt that struck a shattered stone. The resulting explosion was more powerful than Maxwell anticipated, shearing off one of the Sentinel's legs and sending it crashing to the ground. The second Sentinel, however, adapted instantly. It switched to thermal and seismic sensors, fired a volley of plasma bolts to incinerate the spore cloud, and began methodically blasting the canyon walls, bringing rocks down on the Nile's hiding places. They managed to retreat, but not before two Nole were injured by the falling debris. They had wounded one, but the other was now more cautious, more dangerous. Maxwell knew they needed a definitive kill, something overwhelming. He led the Nile to a massive bog filled with the giant, carnivorous pitcher plants. Here, he laid out his most audacious plan. Using the strongest vines, they created a massive net. The bait would be Maxwell himself, his human energy signature and irresistible lure. The plan was to draw the crippled Sentinel into the bog, where the ground was soft and its movements would be hampered. The final battle would take place on the plateau, near the cavern that held the key to their world's invasion, but they had to eliminate the damaged, unpredictable hunter first. The now, their fear replaced by a grim determination, set to work, weaving the trap under Maxwell's direction. They were no longer victims, they were defenders, preparing to turn the hungriest part of their world upon their enemy. The bog reeked of the cloying sweetness of decay. Immense, flytrap-like flora snapped at buzzing insects the size of Maxwell's fist, and the air was thick with the hum of 1,000,000 tiny wings. He was the bait. Hidden in the canopy of the surrounding veil shrooms, Kiwi and the Nile hunters held the thick, sap-coated vines of their massive net. The crippled sentinel emerged, dragging its mangled leg, its red optical sensor locked onto Maxwell's heat signature. As it reached the designated center point, Maxwell gave the signal. The great net fell. The machine, however, was not a simple beast. It fired its plasma rifle not at Maxwell, but at the fungal trunks anchoring the vines, trying to collapse the trap. Seeing the plan failing, Kiya and the other Gnarl leaped from the canopy, driving their bone spears into the Sentinel's joints and optical sensors. The crippled hunter was finally overwhelmed, dragged down by the Gnarl and the bog's own carnivorous pitcher plants, vanishing with a final, gurgling spasm. Just as a cheer rose from the victorious Nal, the ground began to tremble with heavy, rhythmic footfalls. The final sentinel, undamaged and fully operational, burst through the tree line, an avatar of vengeance. It took in the scene, the dead machine, the victorious Nal, and the lone human, and let out a piercing shriek of digital fury. There was no time to plan, no time for another trap. There was only time to run. The cave! Maxwell yelled, pointing back towards the plateau. The way I came. The retreat was a desperate, chaotic scramble through the jungle. The sentinel was faster, its powerful legs allowing it to leap over obstacles that Maxwell and the Nal had to climb. It carved a straight, brutal line through the forest, its plasma rifle blasting a path. Several Nal hunters bravely broke off, leading the sentinel on a brief, suicidal chase to buy the others precious seconds. Maxwell's lungs burned, his legs ached, but he pushed on, Kiya at his side, the weight of their sacrifice driving him forward. He reached the cavern first, the sentinel now terrifyingly close. The air inside hummed with the portal's unnatural energy. Instead of preparing for a final stand on foot, he sprinted towards the stray comet. He slammed the ramp control, the metal door hissing open just as the sentinel entered the cavern. He scrambled inside, yelling, "Get to the ledge!" to Kiya and the others. The ramp slid shut an instant before the sentinel's metallic claws could find a purchase, the sharp scraping sound echoing through the cockpit. Alarms blared as the sentinel began pounding on the ship's hull, its plasma rifle charging for a point-blank shot. Maxwell strapped himself in, his fingers flying across the control panel. Power to forward emitters. Divert all non-essential energy to the main weapon, he commanded the ship's computer. This wasn't a warship, but the stray comet was fitted with a heavy-duty plasma drill, a powerful mining tool designed to cut through dense asteroids. The ship shuddered as the weapon cycled, drawing immense power from the reactor. The targeting computer locked onto the sentinel just as it prepared to fire. An easy shot. A guaranteed kill. But as his finger hovered over the trigger, Maxwell looked past the machine at the shimmering, unstable vortex behind it. He saw the truth in a flash of chilling clarity. Destroying this sentinel meant nothing. As long as that door remained open, Korman-Vex would keep sending more. They would never stop. They would burn this entire world to ash just to settle a score. There was only one way to win. Not just the battle, but the war. Rerouting target, he said, his voice steady. The targeting reticle shifted from the sentinel to the heart of the portal. fire. A lance of pure, blindingly white thermal energy shot from the front of the stray comet. It wasn't a pulse, it was a sustained, roaring beam of industrial power. The portal, a delicate wound in space-time, reacted with impossible violence. It didn't just explode, it screamed, a soundless shriek that vibrated through the very rock of the cavern. The gateway buckled. Colors Maxwell had never seen bled from its edges, and then it collapsed in on itself. A wave of gravitic force erupted from the implosion, catching the Sentinel and slamming it against the cavern wall with enough power to crush its chassis into a mangled wreck. The cavern groaned, and the ceiling gave way, burying the defunct gateway and the last Sentinel under 1,000,000 tons of rock. The door was closed. In the ringing silence that followed, Maxwell powered down the weapon and lowered the ramp. The threat was gone. Kya and the Nile cautiously approached the ship, their large eyes wide with awe and relief. He met them at the base of the ramp, the air thick with the dust of the cave-in. Kya looked from the sealed cavern to him, a question in her eyes. He knew what she was asking. Was he staying? He looked at her, at the peaceful, resilient people he had come to care for, and then at his ship, his ticket to the stars. A profound sadness touched him. He could stay. He could find home here. But he was a ghost from another galaxy, a walking beacon of advanced technology. His very presence would change them, and if Korman-Vex was gone, who was to say some other threat wouldn't one day find its way here? He had brought one war to their doorstep. He would not risk bringing another. "I can't stay," he said softly, the words feeling like stones in his throat. He pointed to the sky, to the unfamiliar constellations. "My path is out there. You are safe now. No one else will ever come through that door." He spent one last hour with them, showing Key how to salvage a solar-powered energy cell from the Sentinel's wreckage, a simple, inexhaustible source of heat and light for her village. It was a small gift, a token of his immense gratitude. He gave her a final, respectful nod, a gesture she returned. As the stray comet ascended from the planet, Maxwell watched the Nile village become a tiny speck of light in the vast fungal jungle. He had severed his ties to the past, closing the door on the man he used to be. He was no longer a fugitive running from something. Now, as he turned his ship towards a vibrant, swirling nebula on the horizon, he was an explorer, flying towards everything. The galaxy was open, unknown, and for the first time in his life, he was truly free.